Good morning. Welcome to Pro Talks. I'm glad you're joining us this Tuesday. And believe it or not, it's almost the end of October. And so I'm going to be talking about today year end checklist for churches and small businesses and nonprofits. And so the very first thing we're going to deal with today is year end follow up on your employees. On your employees. Very, very important. Here we go. Number one, churches need to designate housing allowance for ministers for the upcoming year before the year end. And you should be doing this. You can do this with definitely putting it in your minutes or documenting it also in your employee file with an action form. So that's one thing that you need to do. So number one is you need to make sure that you're updating your minister's housing allowance. And so even if you put in your minutes that you have this housing allowance and for future years, you still need to document it in your minutes because most housing expenses, just like the cost of living, go up. So you need to make sure that you're documenting in that, and you're also bringing it before your deacons in your church and voting that in. You don't have to sit there and bring it before the whole church. You could do it just with the deacons, or you could not say the amount of housing. That is just what the pastor would determine and what his housing expenses are. And I know with some churches and some nonprofits, they kind of tell the whole congregation what the housing allowance is. That's really not necessary. And sometimes the pastor likes to have a little bit of privacy on how much of his salary is actually for his housing. So, but just make sure you document that in your minutes. Make sure you update it every year. So that's one of the things that you definitely need to do, and approve it every year. That shows the approval in your minutes and document it in your employee folder as an action form. And second thing that you need to do as a checklist for the year end is remind your employees on or before January 1st that they can update their W-4 form. That's how that determines their withholding tax. And so they can do that. There is a brand new form, W-4 form for 2020. It is different. A lot of people are confused by it because it doesn't work off dependents anymore. It actually works off of figures. And it's really a great form if people want to use it for the next coming year. And so the form actually calculates the amount of tax so that when you get to your year end, the IRS is trying to make sure you're breaking even. So you don't get a return, but you don't pay. And so that's the whole purpose of the W-4 2020. And it's done in amounts. For instance, it'll ask how many dependents, and you're going to put a $500 price on each dependent. So if you have two dependents, then you would put in that blank $1,000. And that worksheet comes with the W-4 2020. So it is a good idea if people want to do that. They don't have to do that, but you want to make sure that you're reminding them now that by January 1st, they need to have that in. So your payroll's adjusted. And so you can do that for them. So that's the second thing. So first thing was pastor's housing allowance, and anybody that's on the pastoral staff, make sure that's updated, documented, voted on by the deacons, and put in the minutes. So, and then the second thing is to remind your employees about the W-4, that they can change their dependents. Maybe they had, children, a new baby, things like that. They can change that, but they need to do that by January 1st so that it's consistent throughout the whole year. Number three is make sure you identify all your workers and their classification. And this is super important, really important, and it's missed over. Now start reviewing the workers. Is your worker a 1099? Is your worker, or should your worker be an employee? Remember, if you have any doubt that your worker should be classified as an independent contractor, it is better to err on the side of caution and classify them as an employee. And if you do that, if you classify them as an employee, then you're leaning on the safe side. And make sure you do that. Very important. A lot of churches want to 1099 people, but they actually have them come in at a certain time or teach in their school a certain curriculum. And so therefore they're considered a 1099 contractor. But if you make them go, they're considered an employee because you are having them show up at a certain time and teach a certain curriculum. So make sure you have that correct. That is very, very important. And go through and classify all your workers. You may have somebody that shows up to cut the grass and they're using their own equipment and they show up during the week, whatever, just like a company would come in. And so basically, but they're an individual and you're making that check out to them personally. It might be a member of your church or a young couple, maybe has a lawn care business, but they're sole proprietor. So you're making the check to them. They would be considered a 1099. So make sure you review that. Review all your workers in your classification. So that's number 3. Number 4 is review all payments and services. Number 4 is review all payments made to service providers, such as guest speakers, board members, lawn care providers, pest control providers, and if you paid them over $600 collectively throughout the year, they're not a corporation, you need to make sure that they're flagged in your system that you're going to give them a 1099. Your 1099 needs to be provided with a copy, and don't forget you have to file those by January 31st. Used to be February, but it's January 31st is your deadline for 1099s, and you have to send that in to the federal government, as well as send a copy to the person you are creating the 1099 for. So those are the 4 things I wanted to go over today. We need to start thinking about year end. It's very, very important. It'll make it easier now if you plan ahead. So number 1, what did we say? Housing allowance. You need to make sure your documentation is updated and it's in your minutes. And as of January 1st, not January, February, but as the 1st of the year. Second, remind your employees about their W-4, and they can change that in case things have happened, more dependents or whatever it may be. Or maybe they were single and now they're married. So they can change that. And they need to do that by January 1st and turn that into you. And by the way, you can download a W-4 right off the government website. Just Google W-4 2020 and you can actually download and print that off or email it to your employee. Make sure you identify workers and their classification. Should they be an employee? Should they be a contractor? 1099 contractor. Those things need to be determined now. And that'll make it so much easier going into the beginning of the year. And then number 4, review all the payments and services that you provided. And anybody that received a check and to their personal name, not a corporation, but to their personal name, do you have them flagged as a 1099? You need to produce that. It is your legal and responsibility to provide 1099s to those people. And that might be a guest speaker, might be a board member, people you wouldn't normally think about, because guest speakers aren't love offerings anymore. They're considered by the government that you came in and you hired them to speak and you paid them for a service. That's the big key. You paid them for a service. So I hope that's been helpful to you today, and I want you to tune in next week for Pro Talks, because we're going to be talking about year-end reminders, just a checklist of reminders that we should be checking so that when we get to the end of the year, it's not so hectic and stressful and we plan ahead. So tune in next week and get those tips. Have a great week.